Well, nice to nice to be here again, folks. This video for me is going to be a little different because I'm going to speak on some contemporary things. Most notably, what's going on right now, as people will say, is that there's a labor shortage and that there's difficulty getting people back to work. And so I'm going to say a few things about that. Um, of course, at a more of a psychological kind of level, but also at a very practical level. This is going to be a message to, I think, that will confirm what many job seekers are feeling, including myself. I'm between careers and am open to some new opportunities, but I'm encountering some really interesting things that I wanted to share tonight. If you don't know who I am, my name is John Solano. I'm a counselor. I've been a counselor for over 33 years. I've got this YouTube channel. You can see there's like probably 80 or 90 videos on it now, and quite an extensive library. Been trying to help people really see more deeply into things. I mean, I have committed my life and my professional career to helping people, especially people who are experiencing chronic problems to life success. And so anyway, I've had a pretty good career, and like I said, I'm looking to move on to some new adventures. But let me jump into this, okay? One of the things that you probably noticed, I want to say kind of politically, but just kind of like in the landscape, if you will, of our time, was this phenomena back in 2016. What happened in 2016 in the United States? President Trump got elected, right? Now, why is that significant? Well, probably for a lot of different reasons, but what I was tuning into was that most of the political commentary, news outlets, comments being made about Trump throwing his hat in the ring for the presidency was that, he'll never get elected. And so when he ended up getting elected, it blew people's minds. I mean, obviously it upset many, many people, but all those people were bewildered. What the heck happened? To me, that means that, I think kind of the average, I want to say average, I call myself an average Joe. It's like, I'm just a regular guy, just a regular person, probably like you, going to work every day and trying to stay healthy and raising kids and, taking care of a home, etc. I think a lot of times, as we sit back in our homes and watch what's going on, we have a better idea of what's going on than a lot of these political folks who make comments on these issues, the news channels, etc. Because in this case, they were really wrong. And I think that's because they all live in their own little bubbles, their own little silos, and they weren't really tuning in to what was going on for the average person out there, just making ends meet and raising a family. And, and then, kind of speaking of the labor shortage, right? It's something happened, didn't it? COVID hit, right? But, it was an epidemic. But what we're beginning to see is that COVID kind of, I guess you could say, catalyzed or forced some other issues to come forward, like what's going on and what people are calling the labor shortage right now. But let me tell you what I think is going on. Whenever there's and I did a video on this just a couple weeks ago. It was called, how basically it focused on how we as human beings gravitate to tragedy. We are attracted to tragedy, if you will. We go by, go down the highway and there's a car on the side of the road or a traffic accident, we want to look at it. Like scary things, we're attracted to that. Look at Halloween, we're only a few days away from that, and people are very attracted to that. In the video, I make the case that we live in a time where the stories of joy that are meant to balance that out have been under attack and in many ways, actively. And so when that happens, all there are these tragic stories or scary stories, which creates anxiety. Now we know that, probably for a good decade now, we've been seeing sharp increases in anxiety, depression, suicide, addiction. All this despite the fact that, we're supposed to be the most developed country in the world. We're supposed to be on the cutting edge of consciousness, and we're supposed to be one of the most connected countries in the world, i.e. technology. But what we know, through the data is that the more time a person spends on technology, or what we call screen time, the lonelier they feel and the worse their mental health gets. Okay. So know that that's been going on for a while. Now, let's take it back to the kind of the political scene. When COVID showed up on the scene, you saw President Trump trying to do two things. One, he was trying to address the COVID epidemic, the pandemic, and respond to that quickly in the best way that he could. At the same time, he was also trying to keep people optimistic. Trying to do everything it could possibly do to let people know that everything was going to be okay, trying to not create panic, basically trying not to raise anxiety and panic, and ultimately depression. What happened, in 2020? Well, we got a new president, Joe Biden, right? His administration has taken a different tact. Basically, his administration has kind of stepped back really from leadership. So there's been a lot of blaming going on, and blaming in any relationship, in any family, creates anxiety. The lack of personal accountability and blaming always creates anxiety, both for the person who does it and the people who are around them. I cannot unpackage that for you more, but if you look at some of my other videos, you'll get a sense of why that is. But what happened is that when Joe Biden took office, he began to focus on what? On the tragedy, only the tragedy. We were bombarded, and we're still being bombarded by stories of tragedy, and we're being scared. Not only now are we being scared by the pandemic, and COVID itself, but now the idea that this is something that we could be living with for months and months, if not years. And so we're the information coming at us from the political machine, if you will, from its leadership, and from the, if you will, science attached to it, is that we could be dealing with this for years. Well, that's a tremendous amount of angst. That's a very anxiety producing. To know that you could catch a life-threatening disease at any particular moment, and that it's always morphing, it's always turning into something new, and consequently, you're always going to have to get a new shot or a new booster shot, what they call, every 6 months or so. All right. So when all we do is tell scary stories and tragic stories, what do you think is going to happen? Same thing that happens on a personal level. We start to experience chronic anxiety, eventually depression, hopelessness, and with that, suicide, and somewhere along that journey, very likely some kind of addiction, because people have to try to cope with it, right? And when your freedoms are restricted, so for many people, we're not able to take care of ourselves in the ways that we need to, right, to cope with life's anxieties and challenges and fears. When those coping mechanisms are thwarted or diminished, again, it opens the door for really dysfunctional ways of coping. So, really, so people have been saying, okay, well, the reason why people aren't getting back to work is because they've been getting these stimulus checks. The stimulus checks haven't been that much. 1,000, 500, 1,500, maybe a little bit more for people who have bigger families or what have you, but they haven't been that much. And if you haven't noticed, inflation has like doubled. Like we're paying almost $4 a gallon for gas now, when back in 2016, 17, and 18, when Trump was in office, we were paying just around $2. I think it even dipped lower than $2 a gallon at one point. You see that this makes a difference because for the average person like me, like you, who likely has to commute every day back and forth to a job, or you have to take your kids to school and run them around to all these different activities, that hits your pocketbook big time. You know, when you were paying $60 to fill your tank and now you're paying 100, right? I mean, that's almost, you know, to go from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon, right? That's 100% increase. You're paying double now of what you used to. So literally to fill up a tank of gas now in my truck, what would once cost $60 back in 2017, 2018, now is $110, $120, right? So you really think that a stimulus check, a couple of stimulus checks is keeping people home? Some people say, well, why should people go back? You know, you've extended unemployment insurance, et cetera, et cetera. Really? Well, that's run out now, but still, you know, don't you think people really want to get back to work? You know, I think the point that I'm making here is that underneath this, these politicians and scientists and political commentators, just like they missed the boat back in 2016, they're missing the boat now why people aren't going back to work. People are reluctant to go back to work right now because it's like we're stuck in the psychological quagmire, the mud, if you will. You know, we're kind of, yeah, you know, kind of a bit cautious, distrustful. You know, it's hard to know what to trust, what information to trust these days. And there's a lot of things going on, you know, at the level of policy and again, government regulation that's creating more and more angst. If you recall, and again, I'm, you know, I'm not claiming to be either party or what have you, but like you, I watched the news, and when Joe Biden said that you know, the new taxes that he was going to collect would only apply to people making $400,000 and above, and that the rest of us, we would not see any increases. It would not cost a thing, he said. That isn't true. We all feel it in our pocketbooks. I went to the grocery store just the other day to buy broccoli. 4 little heads of broccoli come out to the cashier, $7. Are you kidding me? I bought a small head of cauliflower for $4. That's just crazy. When I used to be able to walk out of the grocery store with 4 bags of groceries, now I walk out of the grocery store with 2, right? So yeah, this is all weighing on us big time. And when we're burdened with constant anxiety and maybe depression and a sense of hopelessness, you just don't feel like contributing to society. You don't feel like pursuing employment. You know, and with some of this policy now where people are being forced back to work, you know, or fired, forced to get the vaccine or be fired, again, that just adds to the distrust. Nobody likes to be strong-armed into things, right? And that's again, I know I'm making some comments here that really need to be unpackaged a bit more, and there are a lot of different feelings about it, a lot of different opinions, but I want to share with you some of the psychological background as to why people are reluctant to engage the labor market. I want to say a few things too to employers, as I mentioned. You know, as I said, I'm between careers right now, and I'm kind of looking at my options, looking at a lot of different possibilities. But here's some things that I've noticed. You know, we've been in a mostly remote work situation, telework situation, working from home for a year and a half, some people even longer. Some people were fortunate enough to be able to work remotely and, you know, telework even before the pandemic. See, this is something that we've talked about for a long, long time. When we talk about, you know, decreasing carbon emissions and all these kinds of things, the more cars we can kind of get off the road, you know, the better, I suppose. And, you know, that's one way to reduce things. but we certainly don't want to do it by taxing the death out of people and prohibiting people from driving vehicles. But if we can allow people some flexibility to work from home, that would have been a great idea. But employers didn't jump on that idea. The pandemic has forced that. And now a lot of people want to work from home. If you're like me, I worked from home for quite some time. And I was more productive at home than I was in the workplace. And all research is showing that now, is that when people work from home, for the most part, probably like 90% of the people who work from home are more productive when working from home than they are in the workplace. And many people prefer it as well. But it seems like employers now, because everybody's being forced to vax, et cetera, is that employers are trying to kind of turn everything back to how it was. They want people to come back to the office. I don't know why that is. People are happier, more productive when working from home. Why do employers want to force people back to the office? All the technology is in place. It's already done. We've already been doing it successfully. Granted, there are some occupations where it's important to be face to face, but why not, offer some hybrid of that? And a lot of the the job opportunities that I've explored, employers are doing that. They want to seem to return things back to how it used to be. Let's see. I mean, the other thing too is talk about COVID. We know that even though people are vaxxed, they can still carry COVID. We also know that even though people are vaxxed, they can still, develop symptoms of COVID. The vaccine is not 100% safe, and it affects everybody differently. So why would you want to bring everybody back to the office, even if vaccinated? Because all it does is it just increases the possibility that people could spread the virus to each other, and some people could experience a reoccurrence or an occurrence of the COVID symptoms. Excuse me. So it makes a lot of sense to continue to bring people in on a rotating shift, or keep people remotely working, do a hybrid situation. If we're going to beat this thing, we got to do it wisely. But it just seems like employers are biting at the bit to bring everybody back to the office. And a lot of places where people work, people don't even have offices. They have cubicles or desks. And so, the chances of the virus spreading in those kind of situations is even greater. The other thing I noticed was that, at least where I'm at in the country, which is the Pacific Northwest, Bellingham area. I'm sorry, folks. Sorry to say this to you, employers. Again, if you haven't noticed, inflation has risen significantly. And I have not noticed any increase in wages. The wages around here are ridiculous. They're actually embarrassing. Let me give you an example. In 1997, I became employed as an employment counselor, vocational counselor, at a beginning level, kind of getting my career off the ground. I mean, my starting wage was over $21 an hour. Back then in 1997, and this was in Canada, back then in 1997, about 1997 all the way up through, I think they said 2007, 2008, the Canadian dollar was doing really well. In fact, there were a number of times that it was on par with the US dollar. So we can't use the excuse that, well, Canadian dollar, $21 an hour, man, that's about 17 or 18 bucks, in the US. No, that wasn't the case back then. $21 an hour. Do you know how much money a chemical dependency counselor makes in this area? A trainee makes anywhere from $16 to $17 an hour. A fully licensed counselor, and I'm talking about basically a nonprofit organization, makes maybe 22 to $24 an hour. To make $24 to $25 an hour as a chemical dependency counselor is high. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Case managers, housing case managers. The highest wage I've seen for those is about $21 to $22 an hour. And that's at the very high end. Most of the case management positions, and they're requiring a bachelor's degree, making $16, $17, $18 an hour. So yeah, in the human service field anyway, because that's where I'm looking, and not only there, but I've noticed also in a lot of other jobs, $17, $18 an hour. Certainly that's not enough to live on. And that's about the kind of wage that you would pay a teenager getting their first job. You know, because I mean, $13, $14, $15 an hour, maybe for like a freshman in high school getting a first job. But by the time you're 19, 20, 21, you know, like 17 bucks an hour, $18 an hour, and requiring a bachelor's degree, that's crazy. That's embarrassing. You know what? You know, it's also like employers need to understand that right now, it's an employee's market, right? It's like, be willing to pay for labor. We're talking about labor shortages. You know, one of the things that I noticed in a number of the postings is that they're asking people to be available weekends, holidays, work nights. Really? I mean, I understand that there's a labor shortage and a supply shortage, you know, and Biden's talking about, you know, companies being operating 24/7, et cetera. But this is not the way you go about that. You know, nobody, you know, mature and who has a life is, you know, is going to want to work on holidays or be on call. You know, it's like if you have a life and you have a family, you have other interests, you're going to school, et cetera, that's not something that you can do. And you're going to pass on those job opportunities. There have been a number of jobs that I've been interested in, but that's what they're asking for. They're asking to be a person to be on call, right? To work holidays, weekends. It's kind of like whatever the business needs. No, it should never be that way. But especially now, it's an employee's market. You know, this is a big one that I'm about to mention. One is people, you know, we need to, as a society, become more trauma informed. There's a lot of talk about that right now, being in trauma informed organization. We have to realize that there's a lot of hurting people out in the world. We live in a world that is often hurtful and tough. If you study the information on what's called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, you'll see the data on that. Most everybody has some wounds that they carry around. And we need to start creating health, if you will, in our organizations. How do you do that? Well, you know, there's a lot of ways. As I said, remote work, telework, being flexible. You know, again, there's so many webinars and resources out there on ACEs and just how to create a trauma-informed agency, a trauma-informed organization. You know, something about the pandemic. Again, a story about a place where I was working is that when the pandemic hit, you know, it caught us all by surprise, whether you were an individual or an organization. And what happens oftentimes is when we get surprised is that we can go into kind of like a fight or flight response to try to deal with this. And the place that I was working at, instead of being trauma informed, in other words, when employees are under a tremendous amount of stress, you kind of want to go easy on them. Yeah, you want to set up some structure, some gentle structure, but you don't want to get heavy-handed in terms of levels of accountability and policy and all this kind of stuff. Well, the agency I was working for did that. And it was, in my opinion, it was a panic reaction. It was a kind of a fight flight type of reaction. You know, the company I was working for didn't know what to do, didn't know how to handle all this in the face of this dramatic change in the pandemic. And so they kind of circled the wagons, battened down the hatches, and cranked up the heat, and, you know, tightened up the screws. And it just created high levels of anxiety for the entire staff. When you know, it really should have been a more trauma-informed approach. You know, one of the other things that's going to go on, that has gone on traditionally and is going to go on now, because again, the labor shortage. So you want to hire new people, but are you going to be able to train them? Or is this going to be more, you know, hit the ground running, you know, learn on the job type of stuff? Like, no, especially in jobs that require a significant degree of sensitivity and compassion, human service field jobs, etc., other jobs as well. People deserve, employees deserve a decent training program, right? You know, and if you're gonna kind of throw people into the pressure cooker, pay them well then. Pay them well, you know? So again, you know, when there's a labor shortage and you don't have a lot of people or can't spare a lot of people to train other people, you've got to increase your wages in order to attract staff. And one of the other things I want to say along with that, not only to attract staff, but pursue them. Pursue them. You know, I see all these job postings over and over and over and over again, like literally months, and, you know, ongoing advertisements for particular jobs. And the employers are just sitting back waiting for resumes to come in. I believe they need to pursue people. You know, there are people out there looking for work, people out there who have posted their information online and are looking for work. Pursue those people. I know there are headhunters and recruiters out there that are doing exactly that. But I think especially probably a lot of nonprofits and other folks are, you know, just sitting back and waiting for resumes to come in. Well, guess what? You might not be getting that many. And if you're going to be asking for, you know, for the moon in those job descriptions, working weekends, long hours, on call, holidays, paying low wages, no, you're not going to get the best talent. Not right now. So those are some things that have crossed my mind. Giving you a little bit about the psychology of what's going on in the pandemic, and a little bit about the labor shortage. People are probably feeling, like I said, distrustful, a little burnt out on getting bombarded with scary stories day after day after day. You know, and it's not just COVID. It's what's going on the borders. It's what's going on in Afghanistan. It's what's going on internationally, China and with Russia. You know, again, you know, different countries increasing their nuclear capacity. It's going on with energy. As I said, you know, look at the fuel prices. And it's going on, again, you know, politically and, you know, in our own backyards. So there's a lot going on right now and a lot to be anxious about. And it sure as heck doesn't help if media and our leaders are constantly shoving it in our faces. And you know, at least have enough leadership to be inspirational and to be optimistic. And unfortunately, that seems to be in short supply. So I hope that as an individual, you can see the need for this. Be optimistic and inspirational with your family and your kids and yourself, and take care of yourself. So I hope this has been some interesting information for you to think about. You know, I miss you guys out there. I wish, we could be meeting by Zoom, but, I get inspired and I just want to share this stuff with you, and hopefully it has some meaning to it for you. So you take care. Have a great Halloween, and I'll keep posting.